The story begins at a high school where many students are playing in a tournament. Paul, a boy, is flirting with Meg, a cheerleader. Paul is completely focused on Meg, while Meg is busy with her cheerleading. Due to this overconfidence, Paul fails to concentrate on the game and ends up getting badly beaten by the opposite team. Paul gets severely injured, and Meg comes over to check on him. Taking advantage of the situation, Paul asks Meg to go out with him. Meg agrees to go on a date with him. Meanwhile, we are introduced to Brian, a boy who has already finished high school but doesn't want to get a job. He wanders around aimlessly. One day, while riding his motorcycle outside, he loses control on a bridge, causing it to skid. Brian doesn't get hurt much, but his motorcycle gets damaged. Because of this, Brian goes to a friend's garage to get the damaged parts. He doesn't have enough money, so he tells his friend that he will come work at the garage over the weekend to pay him back. After taking the parts, he leaves. Next, we see an old man sitting with his dog in a dense forest area of the same neighborhood. Suddenly, the old man notices something strange in the sky, resembling a piece of meat, which keeps moving toward him and crashes into the ground. The old man is shocked and goes over to investigate. Whatever it was, it had a significant impact on the earth, creating a hole. Strange noises come from the hole, so the old man pokes it with a stick to check. Suddenly, a slime-like material appears on the stick, and inside it, a creature is present. The creature slowly climbs onto the old man, causing him damage. The old man screams and runs away. It seems that the slime is an alien species that arrived from space. Meanwhile, we see Paul, who arrives at Meg's house for their date, but it's Meg's mother who opens the door. Meg's mother already knows everything about Paul. Paul is invited inside with respect. We are then introduced to Kevin, Meg's brother, who is leaving with his friends. Kevin had told his family that he would study with his friends at home, but in reality, their plan was to watch a movie and hang out all night. So, Kevin sneaks out without telling the truth. Paul and Meg are having a nice time together, and it seems that both of them needed this moment. Meanwhile, in the forest, Brian is standing at a spot when suddenly the same old man appears in front of him. The old man tries to ask for help, but Brian can't understand what happened to him. The old man shows his hand, which is covered in the same slimy material that had almost consumed half of his hand. Because of this, the old man runs toward the road. Brian tries to help, but just then, a car comes and hits the old man. The car belongs to none other than Paul, who is with Meg. They both quickly get out of the car, and Brian arrives at the scene as well. Brian explains that the old man had been running, asking for help, but he doesn't know exactly what happened. Paul and Meg say that they need to get him to the hospital as soon as possible because his condition looks very bad. Brian also agrees to help, so they all get in the car and head to the hospital. After a short drive, they arrive at the hospital. The old man's condition is very serious, so Paul and Meg quickly take him inside and tell the nurse about the entire situation. They don't know exactly what happened to him, but it is urgent to treat him. The doctor admits the old man and takes him to a room for treatment. Brian feels that everything is under control, so he leaves. Paul fills out the forms for the old man. Paul completes all the formalities, but when he goes inside to check on the old man, he finds that there are changes happening in the old man's body. He is shifting from one place to another. Paul quickly calls the doctor, and when the doctor removes the old man's clothes, it is revealed that more than half of the old man's body has decayed, as if something had eaten him. The same slime material is still attached to his hand, slowly consuming him. The doctor becomes panicked and runs off to get help. Paul is not far behind, trying to call the sheriff for assistance. But unfortunately, it is too late. Above Paul, the slime material has grown much larger, having fed on the old man's flesh. Before Paul can say anything, the slime attacks him. The loud scream causes Meg to rush toward him, but she finds that the slime has completely engulfed Paul, and it is decomposing his body. Meg desperately tries to pull Paul's hand, but the slime has a firm grip, and it begins to corrode her body as well. Eventually, Paul's entire body breaks apart, his organs and limbs separate. The alien-like slime has killed Paul. Meg screams in terror, and soon the sheriff arrives. After some time, Meg's parents come to take her away from the scene. She is so terrified that she cannot say anything. But the most frightening thing is that the slime material has vanished from the hospital, meaning the danger is now even greater. The sheriff's department begins their investigation, hoping to find some evidence and track down the criminal. Meanwhile, in the forest, we see Scott and his girlfriend having a great time in their car. Scott suddenly remembers something important, so he goes to the back of the car. Scott's girlfriend is feeling very sleepy, so she falls asleep in the car, leaving the door open. Little did she know that something dangerous was approaching them, something that could take both of their lives. The slime creature has now entered the car. After a while, when Scott returns to his girlfriend, he is shocked to find that her body has inflated, and all her internal organs are gone. It was the work of the dangerous creature that had killed his girlfriend. The creature then moves towards Scott, intending to attack him. But Scott quickly tries to break the door and escape. Unfortunately, by the time he tries, the slime creature has already caught him. Scott cannot escape and is killed in a brutal manner. The worrying thing to notice is that the creature grows both in size and strength every time it consumes a person. Now, just how big it has become and how much destruction it will cause will be revealed in a short time. Meanwhile, Meg is struggling to cope with Paul's death. Her mental state is deteriorating, and her mother is taking great care to make sure Meg doesn't harm herself. On the other hand, at the police station, Brian is being interrogated by two sheriffs. They had found out that Brian was present that same night. The sheriffs suspected that Brian might have been the one who killed Paul. They continued questioning him about the events, but Brian kept repeating that he had no idea about what had happened. He explained that he and Paul had actually helped that poor old man by bringing him to the hospital. After much questioning, the sheriffs didn't get any solid results, and they realized that without evidence, they couldn't arrest Brian. They decided to let him go but told him they would be keeping an eye on him. As Brian left the station, he was unaware of the trouble that lay ahead. At that moment, Meg ran up to Brian. She knew that the police officers wouldn't do anything to Brian, but Meg had to bring the truth to light. Paul had been killed by a dangerous creature, and Meg had witnessed it all with her own eyes. The problem was that when Meg tried to tell others, no one believed her. She needed some kind of evidence to prove her story. But we find out that Brian didn't believe in any of it. He went straight into a restaurant where he used to go daily. Meg followed him and kept trying to convince him. Meg again explained that he needed to say what he saw, that strange thing on the old man's hand. She thought it was a creature that had killed both the old man and Paul. Brian was adamant that he had definitely seen something strange on the old man's hand, but calling it a creature seemed wrong, especially since they had no proof. Brian was now blaming Meg, feeling that Paul's death was her fault. Meg broke down in tears and was about to leave, but then something changed in Brian. His humanity kicked in, and he quickly went to Meg and asked her to come back. He told her, "I'll do whatever I can. We just need proof to back everything up." So now, Brian was on Meg's side. They both started talking about what could be done. Meanwhile, Freya, a waitress, was carrying orders to the kitchen when she noticed that the sink wasn't draining properly. She tried everything to get the water flowing, but when nothing worked, she called her colleague John to take care of it. John walked over in style and began clearing the sink, but after a while, when there was no result, John made the biggest mistake of all. He stuck his hand into the sink. Inside, there was no one else but the dangerous slime creature, which immediately began pulling John's hand and then his whole body into the sink. The creature attacked John's head and pulled him in, causing Freya to scream in fear. Hearing her scream, Paul and Meg rushed to the scene. They witnessed live action as the slime creature attacked, and they saw how it brutally pulled John's head inside. The suction from the creature was so strong that it started pulling in entire body parts, and John was killed right there. Gradually, as space increased, the slime material began spreading throughout the kitchen. Seeing the creature, Meg, Brian, and Freya immediately ran for their lives. The creature was now on a new hunt and tried to catch Meg and Brian first. They quickly ran into a nearby room, as it seemed like a safe place. But since the creature was made of slime, it could slither into even the smallest spaces. The creature tried to get in, but Brian kept hitting it away. He and Meg hid in the corner, while Freya, completely terrified, rushed outside and called the sheriff for help, hoping they could get there in time. But by the time she was at the phone booth, the creature had surrounded it, as if it knew Freya was there. We saw the bodies of the people the creature had killed, as it had dissolved them into its body. Eventually, it destroyed the phone booth entirely. Freya couldn't escape, and she was killed by the creature. There was no trace left of Freya. After some time, Brian and Meg slowly opened the door and cautiously moved forward. Brian had promised Meg that he wouldn't let anything happen to her, so the two of them moved forward quietly, aware that the slime creature could show up at any moment. Meanwhile, in the city, we are introduced to a man named Trevor, who was very religious. As he was heading home, he encountered the slime creature, which was slowly crawling into the sewer lines. Trevor believed it to be some kind of demon, so he began reciting his prayers. What was surprising was that the creature didn't attack Trevor but instead used the pipes to enter them. Trevor, frightened by what he saw, immediately ran home, only to find that his house was in disarray. He suspected that the dangerous creature had attacked there as well. Trevor discovered some crystal-like objects at his house, which he decided to keep for research. He had uncovered some secret information that he didn't want to share with anyone. Meanwhile, Brian and Meg, avoiding any disturbances, were heading to inform the sheriff. However, they discovered that none of the sheriffs were at the station. They had gone elsewhere to collect clues. There was a lady sitting at the station, trying to contact the sheriffs and give directions. Brian and Meg, worried that the dangerous creature might attack them, quickly left the station and headed to the location where the sheriffs were. They found a police car in the forested area and cautiously approached. Suddenly, a group of people dressed in white suits pointed guns at them, assuming they were intruders spying on them. Just then, their leader, Dr. Mendez, arrived and ordered his team to lower their guns, saying that these two seemed like kids. Dr. Mendez then explained the truth to Meg and Brian, telling them that some time ago, a meteorite had fallen on Earth. Inside this meteorite was a creature that was extremely dangerous and capable of devouring humans in one go. Creatures like this, from the same type of meteorites, had appeared millions of years ago during the time of the dinosaurs. These creatures wiped out the dinosaurs shortly after arriving on Earth. Now, according to space agencies, after all these years, those same creatures were returning. For this reason, they were quickly quarantining people and evacuating the city. Dr. Mendez told his team that Meg and Brian must be safely transported to another location. They were locked inside a van, and the officers began forcing them to the evacuation center. However, Brian didn't trust the police or the government's claims. He suggested they should ignore their orders and go to a place they believed to be safe. But Meg, worried about her family, told Brian to go ahead. She was returning to the city to save her family and brothers. Meanwhile, we see Meg's brother, Kevin, enjoying a late-night movie show. Movies like these were not allowed for kids like Kevin, but he was watching them illegally. Inside the theater, there was a man named Hubs, who suddenly noticed that the air conditioning wasn't working properly. He tried calling the technician, but the call went unanswered. So, Hubs decided to check the air conditioning himself. As soon as he stuck his head inside the cabinet, the creature appeared. Hubs had no chance to escape and started screaming loudly. After a while, the manager arrived and saw the mess everywhere. As he looked up, he found Hubs, whose body had been completely destroyed by the dangerous creature. It was impossible to tell where the rest of Hubs' body parts were. The manager was so terrified that he couldn't escape in time, and the creature caught him. Its size had grown significantly, and it started hunting down the other people in the theater one by one. Meanwhile, Meg rushed into the city to meet her family. They were all safe, but when she noticed her brother Kevin was missing, she realized he was in trouble. Meg immediately ran toward the theater because Kevin was there. Inside the theater, the slime creature had started causing havoc, killing people one by one. Meg reached the theater where everyone was trying to escape for their lives. She immediately called out to her brother, who was trying to open the exit door. Meg reached her brother and, along with his friend Eddie, they began to flee in the other direction because the creature was right behind them, and its size had grown much larger. Meg, Eddie, and Kevin made their way into a sewer line, hoping it would be safer. But little did they know, the creature was also coming after them down there. Meanwhile, Brian was recovering his motorcycle and planning to leave when he saw Dr. Mendez and several scientists pulling a strange spaceship out of the ground. It was at that moment that Brian discovered the truth. The dangerous creature had been created by Dr. Mendez and his institute. It was a biological weapon, not sent from space but from Earth. It appeared to be an alien race, which had been deliberately crashed on Earth. This was all part of the USA's plan to create a biological weapon to use against Russia and wipe out their entire population in one strike. But the information they were receiving suggested that the creature had gone out of control. The creature was continuing to kill their own people, which made it crucial to stop the slime creature. Brian had learned the entire truth, but a soldier spotted him. Brian immediately killed the soldier and got on his bike, speeding away. Several soldiers chased after him, but Brian managed to escape by jumping his bike over a high obstacle, evading them. Meanwhile, Meg, while saving Eddie and Kevin, saw that Eddie had been caught by the dangerous creature. The creature crushed his body completely. Now, Meg focused on saving her brother. She sent Kevin up, but couldn't climb herself. Meg slipped and fell, but suddenly Brian arrived after hearing the noise. He helped Meg onto his bike, and they sped off, but their bike eventually broke down. It seemed like they were trapped by the creature from all sides. The good news, however, was that a soldier appeared who knew a way out through a tunnel. They all managed to escape. At that moment, Dr. Mendez and his team arrived, and Brian exposed their secrets to everyone. Dr. Mendez tried to kill Brian, but just then, huge tentacles emerged from the tunnel, and the creature began attacking everyone. The creature's size had grown so large that it was now coming out of the tunnel, killing everyone in its path. Brian's life was in danger, so Meg helped him. A truck was passing by with ice that had a very low temperature. Meg got an idea, so she planted a bomb and kept shooting at the container with the low-temperature ice, causing it to explode. The explosion sent the ice container near the creature, and due to the extreme cold, the creature froze and died right there. Meg and Brian escaped, but in the end, we see that Trevor, the man who had collected the small samples, was slowly starting to turn into a creature. Though his size remained small, with each person he consumed, he would grow bigger. And thus, our story ended here.